Hi everybody, my name is Amanda. I'm Miranda's mustached alter ego, and I will be giving all of the negative speeches in this debate. I'm about to give the 1NC. The order is one off case, and then case in the order of the cybersecurity advantage and solvency. I have my timer set here for 8 minutes. Is anybody not ready? All right, great. Let's begin. First off is the terrorism disadvantage. First, the risk of terrorism is the highest since 9/11, but the U.S. is preventing imminent attacks with domestic surveillance. Carafano et al. 15. Since 9/11, Islamist terrorist plots total 68. This figure does not consider foiled plots of which the public is unaware. Recently, there has been a dramatic uptick in terrorism. The shooting in Garland is the 6th Islamist terrorist plot or attack in the past 5 months. Add that to the surge of Americans seeking to support ISIS and al-Qaeda, and one fact becomes clear. The U.S. is facing the most concentrated period of terrorist activity in the homeland since 9/11. It is no coincidence that this spike parallels the spread of the Islamic State and other radical groups across Syria, Iraq, and other parts of the Middle East. These terrorist organizations have undertaken a significant effort to reach out to individuals across the world to radicalize and recruit them. FBI Director James Comey stated, "We are concerned about the possibility of individuals in the U.S. being recruited via the internet to join ISIL in Syria and Iraq and then return to the U.S. to commit terrorist acts." Hundreds, maybe thousands of individuals across the U.S. are being contacted by ISIS to attack. Secretary of Homeland Security Johnson echoed these warnings, saying lone-wolf terrorists could strike at any moment. These statements and assessments, together with the explicit statements of intent by terrorist groups, demonstrate the threat of terrorism is on the rise. Fortunately, the U.S. has improved its ability to foil these attacks, largely due to intelligence capabilities. Second, reducing surveillance causes attacks. The NSA is crucial. McLaughlin 15. The NSA's work is the very foundation of U.S. intelligence. The NSA is the starting point for determining what holes need to be filled through other means of intelligence collection. That's because its information on foreign developments is so comprehensive and reliable. Any efforts to rein in the agency must allow for the possibility that change risks serious damage to U.S. security. The NSA is not perfect, but it is less a victim of its actions than a broad distrust of government. The administration must reject ideas that add time and process between the moment the NSA picks up a lead overseas and the time it can cross-check records to determine whether there's a domestic dimension. With the decline of central government authority in the Middle East and North Africa in the wake of the Arab Spring and the war in Syria, terrorists have the largest havens and areas for operational planning in a decade. The atomization of the movement has made the job of intelligence more demanding. Now is not the time to give up any tool in the counterterrorism arsenal. Third, strong NSA intelligence is critical to prevent WMD terror attacks. Pittenger 14. What role does intelligence data collection play in platforms for attack, including physical assets, cyber, chemical, biological, nuclear, and the electric grid? Each ambassador acknowledged the threat grows greater today than before 9/11. Regarding the intelligence, their consensus was, we want privacy, but we must have your intelligence. We cannot yield to misguided voices who view the world as void of terrorists. The number of terrorism-related deaths worldwide doubled between 2012 and 2013. Vigilance and strength have deterred our enemies in the past. That same commitment is required today. We must make use of all available technology to counter their operations. Now, onto the cybersecurity advantage. 1. Golden key solves. Only law enforcement should have access. Washington Post 14. Law enforcement officials deserve to be heard in their recent warnings about the impact of next-generation encryption technology. What has the law enforcement community up in arms is the prospect of losing access to data on smartphones. This is not about mass surveillance. Law enforcement authorities are not asking for the ability to surveil everyone's smartphone, only those where there is a court-approved warrant. This seems reasonable and not excessively intrusive. The government in many other situations has a right and a responsibility to set standards for products so that laws are followed. Smartphone users must accept that they cannot be above the law if there is a valid search warrant. With all their wizardry, perhaps Apple and Google could invent a kind of secure golden key that will retain and use only when a court has an approved search warrant. 2. Alternate causality. Worker shortages jeopardize cybersecurity. This is more important than technology. Davidson 15. Even if digital networks were magically modernized, the protection of personal information would still be at risk. The reason? Too few cyber experts. The federal government has a serious shortage of cyber talent and the future is dim. Tony Scott, the U.S. Chief Information Officer, told the National Council on Federal Labor Management Relations, it's the hardest recruiting on the planet to date for people with those kinds of skills. Overlooking the importance of people is a serious mistake, said Steyer, President and Chief Executive of the Partnership for Public Service. At the end of the day, give me great talent over great technology. Talent will find a way to fix what technology lacks. The partnership published a report on closing the federal cyber talent gap. It said the government lacks the cyber workforce it needs and does not have a comprehensive strategy to recruit and retain that workforce. 3. No cyber impact. The threat is massively exaggerated. Healy 13. America does not face an existential cyber threat, despite recent warnings. Our cyber vulnerabilities are far from comparable to nuclear war. Mullen called cyber the single biggest existential threat that's out there because cyber can attack our infrastructure, our financial systems. While it's true that cyber attacks might do those things, it's also true that they have not only never happened, but are far more difficult to accomplish than mainstream thinking believes. A study of the 25-year history of cyber conflict has shown the impact of cyber attacks has been consistently overestimated. Cyber incidents have tended to have the effects that are either widespread but fleeting, or persistent but narrowly focused. No attacks have been both widespread and persistent. There have been no cases of anyone dying from a cyber attack. Any widespread disruptions have been short-lived and causing no significant GDP loss. Experts have been warning of a cyber Pearl Harbor for 20 of the 70 years since the actual Pearl Harbor. It doesn't add up to an existential crisis. 4. No grid collapse. It's not technically feasible for hackers to take down the grid. Pereira 14. A half dozen security experts agreed it's virtually impossible for an online-only attack to cause a widespread outage of the North American power grid. Even laying the groundwork for such a cyber operation could qualify as an act of war against the U.S., a line that few nations' state-backed hacker crews would wish to cross. None denied that hackers could penetrate the networks of bulk power providers. But there's a huge gap between that and causing a civilization-ending sustained outage. Electrical grid hacking scenarios mostly overlook the engineering expertise necessary to intentionally cause harm to the grid, say experts. The grid is designed to lose utilities all the time. You're just not able to cause this nationwide cascading failure for any extended duration. It's just not possible. Now on to solvency. There is no solvency. Reforms like the plan will just be circumvented. Greenwald 14. The last place one should look to impose limits on the powers of the U.S. government is the U.S. government. Governments don't walk around trying to figure out how to limit their own power. The entire system in D.C. is designed at its core to prevent real reform. This Congress is not going to enact anything resembling fundamental limits on the NSA's powers of mass surveillance. Even if it somehow did, this White House would never sign it. Even if all of that miraculously happened, the fact that the U.S. intelligence community and the national security state operates with no limits and no oversight means they'd easily co-opt the entire reform process. That's what happened after the eavesdropping scandals of the mid-1970s, which led to the establishment of congressional intelligence committees and a special oversight court. The committees were instantly captured by putting in charge supreme servants of the intelligence community like Feinstein and Chambly and Rogers and Rupsberger, while the court quickly became a rubber stamp with subservient judges. Ever since the Snowden reporting began, the White House's strategy has been obvious: enact something that is called reform, but in actuality changes almost nothing, thus strengthening the very system he can pretend he changed. That's the same tactic as Silicon Valley: be able to point to something called reform so they can trick hundreds of millions of current and future users into believing that their communications are now safe if they use Facebook, Google, Skype, and the rest. Now I have 17 seconds left, which is perfectly fine.